Hello everyone, welcome back. All right, I'm going to finalize these 3 videos that I have been doing on the global financial oligarchy in the West, and how I told you that I find that this, call it, whatever you want, the Agenda 2030, this has been going on for a while, as I've explained. And I explained also that there are 3 main pillars of society, that if you're going to reorganize the world in your own image, you need to destroy or erode in some sort of way 3 pillars that keep society together, nations together, cultural cohesion. And those 3 pillars I maintain were the family, Christianity, and the nation state. I explained in one video about the erosion of society, of the family, and how that might be accomplished, or they're trying to accomplish it. In the second video, I talked about the erosion of the nation state. By the way, about 15 minutes before, somehow it stopped. And then I tried to resurrect the last 2 or 3 minutes. But what I was trying to say in that video is that you could see, if you follow my argument during the video, that you can see that by the time this new ideology, call it woke or whatever it is that we are enduring today, came about, you see that by the time it came about, the laws were there, the politics were there, the policies were there, they had been established there, more or less, not for a few decades already. And so everything fell into place. And I told you that if you want to see it as a conspiracy, that's fine. If you want to see it as too much of a coincidence, I told you about, well, it's not a good argument, but about what Roosevelt said, that in politics there are no coincidences. And if one exists, that has been carefully prepared beforehand. In any case, that video, I am sorry that the conclusion, was not there at the end, and afterwards I couldn't pick up the thread of my argument, but I'm going to leave it aside. So today I'm going to talk about Christianity as a major obstacle for the reorganization of the world. I thought about whether in fact it should be religion rather than Christianity, religion in general. From a Western point of view, I don't think it would be the correct one, because religion is a very wide word that encompasses a lot of things. And so we see, for example, that in the Western world, many are talking about different religions coming up, different modes of spirituality called religion, many other, it goes by the word sometimes, the general word of cults. I'm reluctant to use that word because in the Latin languages, cult means ritual, but I know that in the English language it means a sort of a false religion, as it were. So I don't want to call it religion, because new religions will be coming up. I had to say Christianity because that is where we see the erosion of religion in the West. And more than Christianity, I'm going to say Catholicism and traditional Catholicism, as well as the Catholic Church, as well as the Orthodox Church. I don't know what the differences are. I know that between the Catholic and the Orthodox are differences, that they split apart in the 11th century. That's basically all I know. I know that there were problems with this word or that word. I know that there were problems with the Bishop of Rome, the hierarchy, the Pope, and so on. I think, not knowing anything about it, just intuitively, I think that the split would have come because of the difference of civilizations between East and West, cultural. But in any case, we Catholics in the West, I have never, perhaps there are some, I suppose, but to me it's totally against my Catholic beliefs to think of my Orthodox brothers and sisters as different. I know it's the same religion. There might be differences here and there, but it's the same. I know it's probably not the same in the Orthodox countries, because I read Dostoevsky, and Dostoevsky is a moral man, very orthodox, and nevertheless he had this thing against the Catholic Church, which I assume it was not because of difference in doctrine, but perhaps it was the hierarchical thing. I don't know. So I think that there is more of a dislike there from the East to the West. I have never encountered anybody in the Catholic world, not really, that doesn't see the Orthodox as the same doctrine, the same faith, and we share just about everything, including the saints, including the endurance during centuries of persecution, the martyrs, and certainly the Eucharist. And the reason why I am going to say not just Christianity in general, but the Catholic and the Orthodox Church is because we both share this main thing. I don't know whether to call it a thing. The Eucharist. And what does that mean to non-Catholics? It means the Christ coming back and being crucified again for us at the hands of a miserable priest who could be very good or could be worse than all of us put together. But it's not the man. It's the man that the Church said, you are anointed to do this. And we know that Christ didn't particularly keep company with the brightest and the best and the most holy. He chose not the learned, the 12 disciples, but he chose the fishermen, just ordinary people, illiterate, obviously. And he didn't run away from sinners and so on. So I don't think he's disgusted to come back to the hands of a lowly priest. It's not him, Joe Blow, whoever that is. Would respect his office, but it's not him, nothing to do with him. And that is why in the Catholic Church sometimes we don't even know the name of the priest. It doesn't matter who he is. And I'm going to focus on this difference of, the Catholics and the Orthodox, and then the rest of many more Christian denomination Protestants. because in the United States, for example, there are about 50,000 Protestant denominations. In other words, it's pretty easy to open a new church. It's probably as easy as to open a new business. Okay, so you open a church, you call it whatever you want, and then the pastor there will preach the gospel. And there may be differences between them, but each one teaches the best he can. I am not putting anyone down here, because I have met people of great understanding and morality and sincere faith. So it's nothing to do with that. It's just that this is the main difference. What the difference between the Catholic and the Orthodox and the rest of the Christian denominations. And I think the attack on Christianity is because of this. The attack on Christianity is on the crucified Christ, that Joshua of Nazareth, who died crucified at a cross and then resurrected. I don't even think that they have a problem with resurrection, because you could argue it with logic. How is that possible? And so on. And I don't think the problem is on the resurrection. I notice that the problem is with the crucified Christ, who comes to you 1,000,000 times a day, everywhere, if you ask him to do so, at the hands of a priest. And this is major. And I am convinced of that. And so I have to ask myself, why? Why this hatred of Jesus of Nazareth? I think my camera is falling down. My goodness, this is the last thing I wanted now. Why this hatred of Jesus of Nazareth, whose followers began to be persecuted from the very moment he died on the cross. Throughout the centuries, it hasn't stopped. The persecution is in different ways, but it's always there. Why is it? It might not be, you see, that was another God or the Son of God. The Romans would have had no problem with you having a different God. You could have your own God. Good. You have another God. Fantastic. Put it up there. In the pantheon or whatever, and we'll just, the more the merrier. They didn't have any problem with additional gods. It was this particular God that the Christians were worshipping that would change the whole morality even of the ancient world. And the persecution began first here and there and so on, but you would persecute the leaders. You would feed them to the lions. Or like Saint Stephen, you roasted him there on a grill, like a side of mutton by the Sandrine. But then the persecution really, a worldwide, as it were in the Roman world, persecution came about for about 3 centuries. I know that the poet from the 4th century, Prudentius in Spain, has all these verses about the martyrs in Spain. Christianity came to Spain in the 1st century. We have James and Paul, but also we actually have the 6 apostolic fathers sent there by St. Peter. And one of them, Secundus, went to Avila, St. Teresa of Avila, that same town. And he goes almost province by province talking about the martyrs. And he says at the end, the soil of Spain is saturated with the blood of martyrs. But not only of Spain. If we look at the very beginnings of Christianity, where was it? From Egypt all the way, Mesopotamia, all the way to Persia, really. What is today Turkey? Because it was Greek, it was before the Ottoman Empire, it was a Greek-speaking culture. And throughout the Middle East, why do we call it Middle East? Because in Europe we always called it Near East, and then Middle East, and then Far East. But the countries along the Mediterranean that are now called Middle East, they were always Near East. I think it's because for Americans, they are the Middle East. And so we don't... Anyway. But that is the cradle of Christianity. All those countries in the Near East, all along the African coast, and then the Mediterranean. That is where Christianity started. That is where most of the martyrs came from. So I would say also that the sand of all those countries of the Near and Middle East have been soaked with the blood of Christians. So the persecution began, it lasted for 3, perhaps even 4 centuries, really. But then at the same time, the church, the early church, that is the Catholic and the Orthodox Church, the Christian church from the Apostolic Fathers, right there with the apostles, and very soon after that were already called the Catholic Church. It's not something that came in the 12th century or the 11th, right? So then the church had to fight all types of heresies. This heresy, that heresy, the other heresy, hands full. And it would be defeated, most of them. The Arian heresy, the one that said that Christ was not divine, that persisted for a long time, and we can say that it still exists, although it goes by other names. But for the most part, they were movements or groups that would stand there and tell the Catholic Church, you are wrong, it's like this. And the Church said, no, it's not, it's like this. Anathema. They were outside, facing, confronting the Church. But there was another heresy that was different from all of them. It had been there before Christianity. It was Gnosticism. A kind of a spirituality I'm not going to go into now explaining Gnosticism or the classical Gnosticism. Okay, it was an attempt to define man and the world. I won't go into the architect of the universe and the many emanations and the demiurge and all that. You can, right. But it and you had the Persian Gnosticism, and you had the Egyptian Gnosticism, and you had especially the Syrian Gnosticism. And this is while Christian martyrdom was taking place in those countries. But as Christianity came about, another thing about Gnosticism that is very peculiar to them is that they have the elect. Those are the ones who know. The rest do not know. And you will, if you are capable or if you are granted that knowledge, ascend steps towards the knowledge. All right, it was let's say a religion that excluded most of the people. Only the elect knew the mysteries. With the advent of Christianity, what happened was that they did not fight Christianity head on, but they would become Christians from the inside. But this is what differentiated them. They would fight Christianity from within, not from without as the others. And it was a question of for the rest of the Christians throwing fog at their eyes. Okay, because they would say that they were Christians. And this is something that is going to remain there. So, these Gnostics, let's call it Gnostics, even though the ones today are very different, or perhaps not that much, from classical Gnosticism. But there have always been this aspect within the church of Gnosticism, which goes totally against Christianity. All right, so let me look at my bullet points too. Okay. Nowadays, we see for the last century, from the beginning of the last century, we see a clear attempt from without and from within the Catholic Church, trying to change doctrine. And this would flourish especially in the 1960s. The Catholic, not the church, but the Catholic liturgy was completely changed, Protestantized. It's an attempt to beginning to erode. The fathers of the council, most of them were not aware. The changes in the liturgy came because there were some activists, obviously, and they convinced them that this was good. All the changes, would be more accessible to the people. Oh, that's good. Okay, so I won't go into the Vatican Council either. But the church was pretty much destroyed. The massacre of the nuns. I say massacre because from one day to the next, practically, the schools, the hospitals, all that Catholic social work disappeared, practically overnight. Monasteries, the priories, gone. At the same time, in the Orthodox Church, of course, we know what happened after. Am I speaking loudly enough? It's late at night. After the communist takeover, we know that religion, Christianity, was prohibited. And so the priests had to go underground, to the basements, who knows where, the same as Catholic priests had to do after the Reformation. And we know, actually, thinking about it, just came to my mind something, I don't know whether it's true or not, but something that I read about President Putin of Russia, that his parents actually had 2 children before him, and they died of hunger probably in those days. And so when he was born, his mother, through the friend of a neighbor and the other friend and the other neighbor and so on, managed to find the priest to baptize him. Imagine the courage. If that is true, I don't know. I just read it somewhere. The courage of that woman, because imagine what would have happened to her and to all the neighbors and all the cousins and and everybody else. I know that his origins are humble, because one day I saw him, through translation obviously, say that he was a descendant of the serfs. He was proud of it. The serfs, practically slaves, really. I mean, you had your master to whom you had to bow all the way to the floor, and And he said that he was a descendant of serfs. Well, probably, yes, obviously of humble origins. Okay, so here we are. Now the Orthodox Church is blooming in Russia. With the help of the government, they are restoring churches and so on. But we see a slight attack there too, and we saw it, unfortunately, in Ukraine. I know that these are very difficult times in this type, where in the times we live in. But in the Ukraine, in Kiev, which was the beginning of Russia, that is how Russia started and then spread in the, empires of Alexander I, Catherine the Great. But Kiev was that essential part, and that was where the original place. I hope I'm not misunderstanding this, but it was the equivalent of perhaps Rome, something like that. It is called the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. But of course, when Ukraine became independent from after the fall of the Soviet Union, and Ukraine became an independent country, there were attempts, quite successful at times, of doing away with that seat of the Ukrainian Church, which was the Russian Orthodox Church, and separate from it. And instead of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, I think I have a video about this, it became the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, something like that, same thing, but a different thing. But we do know that when the troubles started, before the troubles started, when Pompeo was still under Trump, the director of the CIA, that this was very much promoted. And there were millions of dollars there. And of late, just a few months ago, we saw the original church being persecuted, and the relics taken and spread all over museums in Europe. And there is that attempt at that original traditional church to undermine it. I won't talk about the Vatican because I don't want to start crying here. Anyway, so let's go back to the question. Why? The question remains, why the crucified Christ? Joshua of Nazareth who was he and his teachings? Okay, so as I said, crucifixion was a normal type of punishment at the time, certainly for slaves. I have not heard anybody ever query or go against the teachings of Jesus, what he actually taught, saying, no, he was wrong on this and he was wrong on that. That is not where the issue is it? No. So the thing is who he was. And that was the whole thing. Okay. So the persecution, first for blasphemy and then for everything else, that's where it started. And it started at the cross. And it hasn't subsided. And right now it is the crucified Christ that is the problem. Resurrection, as I said, is not that big of a problem. It's the crucified Christ. And I'm interested, I really want to know why. So, I hope I'll get to it. By the way, I am aware that I'm speaking slowly. And that is because I'm thinking about it as I go along. Perhaps, you can go to the speed and put me... I actually tried it myself once. And I put myself on the 1.25 or 1.50. And it sounds really good. I go much faster. And I was actually there admiring myself, saying, oh my goodness, I sound so articulate here. I wish I could speak like that, but I can't. Let me bring the... Oops. I'm having problems with the camera today for some reason. It's falling. Okay, so let me go through a few battles in case you think that the persecution has stopped. I have been researching this a little bit, and I'm going to give you an example. Before I get to the actual battle that we are having in the West, let me tell you about a few battles that Christians have everywhere else in the world. I'll come to the West afterwards. Okay, so I have been looking at things and many different countries. Let me share with you the notes I took. Battles in Syria, for example. This is about 9 years ago against the Orthodox Church. Okay, I see in a video a very old priest talking about what was happening there. And he's saying that they're constantly being under attack. This was about 9 years ago. And the Christians there are very worried. He doesn't call himself Catholic or Orthodox. He just says Christians. We are worried. And he says, I do not understand why they are trying to chase us out of our country. It is our homeland, and we have been here, our churches have been here for more than 2,000 years. We were here before the Muslims were. This is an old priest there because there were churches being attacked and people killed. Another example, I found videos on Egypt. One particular incident, this is about how long ago? About 3 weeks ago. I might be wrong there. 43 dead. The Muslims attacked them, and dozens of wounded. And this attack was against the Coptic Christians. Those are the Christian church in Alexandria, Egypt. Another video I found 8 years ago, Iraq. We know that about 1,000 Christians are killed every year. One dead every 5 minutes in a place called Karagosh. Christians were decapitated. And this was at the time of the war, the Gulf War, about 2003. Okay, and there was an exodus of 600,000 Chaldeans, it says in the report. That is Christians, yeah. Okay. Another example, Uganda. This is a video from about 2 months ago. By the way, most of these videos, not all of them, but most of them I found amazingly in Latin American channels, in the news, splashed all over the place. 3 Christian churches burned to the ground, and they keep reporting on that in Latin America. Okay, another example, Uganda, 2 months ago. More than 41 Christians assassinated in a school. They set fire to it and burned them alive. Some with machetes. Some others were kidnapped in the city of Mopondwe. Okay, another example, India. About 6 years ago, a video. In the city, I don't know whether it is a city or a province of Orissa, 2% of the Indian population is Christian. And Catholics tend to be those at the bottom of the caste scale. Okay, so that you know, anyway. And a priest was saying that in the small communities where he ministers, there are Christians and there are Muslims, but they don't have there are no problems between the Christians and the Muslims. There are small communities and they're neighbors and they live together. But the problem was with some movements, radical movements, Hindu movements, not from the Muslims. Okay, another example. 3 weeks ago, churches, not 3 weeks ago, the video is from 3 weeks ago, but I couldn't, spend too long researching this because I was just going to put them as examples. But the video is from 3 weeks ago. Churches burnt in Pakistan. Pakistan is a country of about 240 million inhabitants. Less than 3% are Christians. Most are Muslims. As we know, in 1947, Pakistan was formed as an independent country. Basically, the Muslims from India. Yeah. Okay. Now, the problem here is that in Pakistan there is in Islam, I suppose there are some laws, strict laws against blasphemy. Yeah. And that is applied, it can be applied for those who blaspheme, and it can also be used sometimes to persecute others. It's something that it is used sometimes not justly, or it can be abused. Anyway, a Christian man was found with a Bible that was taken to one of the leaders, who said, I don't know what he said, but in any case, that house was ransacked and burnt. And then what happens usually, it spreads. So 3 or 4 churches burned, people killed, and so on and so forth. In 2009, 60 houses were attacked, the people burned inside, and so on. In a video from 2022 tells me that the number of Christians persecuted is increasing dramatically today. There are more than 360 million Christians outside Europe that live in regions with a very, very high persecution rate and discrimination levels. They're almost martyrs, these people. About 1,000 Christians a year around the world are murdered. And the nation, actually, that seems to be at the top of that is Nigeria, in the nation where most martyrs. And there is an organization called Open Doors, is World Watch List, that has been tracking this for 60 years, an organization. And they have put Nigeria, is it Nigeria? Yeah, Nigeria at the very top of the very top of that list. Let's go back to the question. The crucified Christ, why? The poor have never had a problem traditionally getting down on their knees and begging God for perseverance, faith, hope. They don't have a problem with being on their knees. Traditionally, the poor had dignity. And it was natural in olden times. It is when we become wealthy, when we become rich, comfortable, that we find it more and more difficult to kneel down, to bend. We're doing fine. Life is good. You don't need to bend to anybody. And those who do are seen by these people as rather rustic. This takes me to talk about the 2 loves that the mystics talk about. I know I'm going around a very roundabout way, but if you can stay with me, that's the only way I can explain it, because otherwise if I just say the Agenda 2030 is persecuting Christianity, you're going to say, where did you get that from? I'm trying to explain why Christianity is a problem. Okay, so let me talk to you again about my mystic. It comes very handy many times. My mystic, all of you know, those who have been following me for a while, that I am the translator of a particular 16th century Spanish mystic from the Spanish into English. And I have been with him for a long time. We've been living together for a very long time. And he is a 70-odd Franciscan friar from the 16th century. Nevertheless, we sort of came to know each other, and so we have this relationship, and I just call him my mystic or my guy. He doesn't mind. And it's very important that we understand, because he's going to explain it very well, and you'll have to put up with me reading, because I cannot do this with my own words myself. I cannot explain it that well. But he's talking about that there are two drives in man, two loves, as he says, that are contrary to one another. Love of God and love of self. Now, stay with me. I'm going to bring God into the picture, but it's not going to hurt you. You're not going to die. Okay? You might even learn something. In other words, the eternal or the transitory, the temporal. These two drives that we have, that are going to be a choice that we make, one or the other. So allow me to read. This is going to be a sort of better English than mine. Okay. And he says, "It is now time to speak of self-love, the major obstacle we shall encounter on our way to a rich spiritual life." What has spiritual life got to do with the Agenda 2030? Be patient, I'm telling you. This is an egotistical, self-serving love aiming towards placing the individual above all else, including God. This founder of Babylon, he says, is the source of all wrongs and of all our misfortune. It is an obstacle so great that will incapacitate any resolve we might have to reform ourselves spiritually and find meaning in life. And in order to understand what this love is and how it operates, let us try to understand the following well from the very beginning. There are two enemies, two contending forces within us, each pulling in its own direction, each struggling to gain supremacy over the other and reign supreme in our souls. And they are the spiritual and the mundane. If you want, love of God and love of the world. I say they're capital enemies because each struggles to achieve its own aim and objective. They are like two sovereigns, two kings, each fighting for the establishment of his own crown. There cannot be two kings in one kingdom ruling jointly or side by side, or taking turns. There can be only one king. And for us, this means that there can be only one primary love in our souls. From all other loves and affections and will derive from that primary one, the main one. The one fountainhead, one spring, one source, from which and through which everything else we happen to love will be loved. There are two main ones. This struggle, he says, is a choice. A choice between the spiritual and the ephemeral, between the eternal and the transitory, between God and the world. If our first choice is not God, then naturally it's going to be whatever else we love above all else, with our will and our heart. And because our own self tends to favor that which it has closest to its heart, obviously the choice is going to be the self. It's going to choose itself. And so what we are now left with is a struggle. Let us remind ourselves a choice for primacy in our soul between two contending loves. Love of God or love of self. Let's put it like that in summary. Two opposing sides for whom no agreement, no harmony, no possible compromise can ever be reached. He's not saying that you shouldn't respect yourself or anything else like that. He's talking about choosing the world, and within the world, you, obviously, it, yeah, you're it, as opposed to the eternal and to God. And then he goes on to explain for a long time what love of God is, and so on. I'll give you a very good lecture on spirituality, but then he says, what about self-love? Being against divine law, natural law, what can you expect but for it to be messy? My camera. False, unthwarted, inconsiderate, and unjustifiable. It is against God, against truth, and against nature. It is the first act of injustice, the first turmoil, the first problem, the first injury and offense to God. How? The first vice and the first evil, the first slap in God's face. How's that? When I take this most sovereign power to myself, I offend His Majesty gravely, he says, and do him great injustice. I am, in fact, scorning him, laughing at him, taking away the honor due only to him. I am making myself God in his place. And this is the worst evil deed I can possibly do, here's the preacher. Because, quite unashamedly, I am trying to take away the supremacy that belongs only to him and destroy it. I am not just disregarding God here. I am treating him as second to myself. And consequently, what I am in fact doing is stealing and snatching his crown. And this is the most grievous act of hostility we can do against God. It is the point at which unhappiness begins, and from here on, we will hop and hop from vain and fleeting pleasure to another vain and fleeting pleasure, all the way down to misery and emptiness and unhappiness. This is what he says. But let me say one more word about love. I love this guy. He has a way of saying things. And he used to go preaching and preaching outside inns. Can you imagine saying all this outside of a pub in the 16th century? He was probably stoned more than once. Anyway, let me say one more word about love. The nature of love is to convert the lover in the beloved. Whatever external object or creature I love, by the mere act of loving it, I transform myself in it. I become one with it. That is what love is. And so when I love myself over and above everything else, including God, I am making myself the object of my own love. In other words, I am making myself my own foundation, my own source, my own fountainhead, and my own goal. My own starting point and my own end point. My own departure and my own destination. Outside of God and against God. I follow myself and love myself as an end in itself, and everything else I happen to love, I love it only because I see myself in it, because it benefits me. I use everything and everybody as a means to satisfy and love myself. I am my own Lord and recognize no other. And in all of this, what I am really doing is conferring on myself superiority over God. And having made the choice only to follow me and mine, my life will follow on accordingly. I shall end now, but let me just say one more thing. Self-love is the source of our hostility towards anything that is and has to do with God. This is because we see ourselves as God, and each one is a God to himself. And the tragedy of all this is that we end up believing it and wanting to be treated as such, craving God's honor and glory for ourselves. And pride and conceit are something that hurts God deeply and that he punishes most severely. I don't know where it was that he had. Give me a couple of seconds here. Yes, this in the following chapter, but he's talking about something else. But then he says, I shall end on this note. He's always ending, and he goes on and on. Self-love, as I have said, is the foundation and root of all evil, and in short, you will not free yourself from it unless you are ready to destroy it and crucify it in your heart. You must do this because this self-serving master, once implanted in your soul, is far from sterile. From it, this self-love, two other different loves are born. One pertaining to the mind, representing our worship of status and success and concern for reputation and view of one's own standing and excellence, and the other pertaining to the senses, our unquenchable thirst for physical satisfaction of all kinds. Therefore, if, in contempt of God, you put yourself above him, you're going to love yourself in either of these two ways, by means of the mind or by means of the flesh. For it is from these two false gods that all others are begotten. And if you worship your excellence and your reputation, mind, and what others think or say about you, you're going to love everything that leads to flattery, aggrandizement, adulation. And if it is sensual delights you're after, or you will unceasingly search for anything that promotes them or contributes to them, forever caught in a whirl of increasing them and discarding them and increasing them and discarding them again. But what is common to both these pleasures of body and mind, these two loves, however, is that we do not love them for themselves. We do not love temporal and external things for what they are, but for the satisfaction we get out of them. Thus, the more satisfaction they give us, the closer and the more entrenched they become established in our heart. And because the king of all these false gods, to whom they all bow and pay heed and obedience, is worldly success, usually represented by the shortcut of money, money tends to be loved above all else. And so we love degrees and titles and appellations and ranks, and we love careers and status and commissions and positions. Here's a way. And we love dioceses and bishoprics and missions and jurisdictions. All these we love, but what we are really loving is ourselves. We use them for our satisfaction and aggrandizement. We use them to worship ourselves. My dear brothers and sisters in the Catholic faith, I have been saying this all along, and I'm going to say it one more time. Please, no more. All right. All sins are either founded on this self-centered and self-serving love, or are born from it. Self-love begets arrogance. Arrogance being love of the adoring view we have of ourselves. And it begets lust and gluttony, which is an excessive devotion to carnal joy. And it begets avarice, the disorderly yearning for external things, mainly money. And since what we love above all else is our own standing, reputation, and the recognition afforded us by others, we are now going to hate everything else that stands in their way. And so now we have rage and anger, which are born out of love of vengeance of those who would frustrate our ambitions, passions, and delights. And we have envy, which is hate of someone else's fortune and love of his misfortune when it affects us in any way. But it does not stop here. This monster is not content with affecting the mind only. It is eager to spread its tentacles to the body too. And now we have laziness and lack of discipline and idleness, which the body especially loves. And all this will prevent us from starting or continuing good and virtuous works. Saint Bernard was right, he says. If only we could pluck out this poisonous weed from our hearts, there would be no need of hell. Okay, so that's my guy. So, the crucified Christ. Why? The hatred. Let's go now. I keep posing the question. So let's go now to the present day Gnostics. The presence of this living God in the Eucharist Why? We saw that they need us alone. Yeah, it's much easier if you don't have a family, as we saw. If you're not part of a group, of your tribe, of your nation, if you are just there by yourself, isolated, and without religion. Plato used to say that those who, pagan well before Christ, but nevertheless the spiritual, the thing above you, that you have to bow down to. And you're going to whether you like it or not. Plato used to say that a non-spiritual man is like an orphan of mother and of father. You have nothing. There is an emptiness in your soul. There is a vacuity. There is a silence there. That is like a torture within, and you don't know what it is. It's just that you can't find the reason for something, and you're empty, and you have a lot of the things that people suffer from, called now mental illnesses, for me are a spiritual emptiness. Not all of them, obviously. If you have something wrong, you have something wrong. But I'm saying about this feeling of all the things that come from loneliness and depression and not knowing what to live for, this despair. It comes from the fact that you are orphan spiritually. And when you are in that situation, allow me to say that you will be much more easily manipulated, because when you have a very strong foundation, spiritual foundation, your soul is not silenced. What do I mean by soul? Look, throughout history, philosophers and everybody always defined man as having body and mind and soul. What was the soul? Well, I couldn't exactly explain what soul was, but that life that sometimes it goes by the heart, your hopes, your emotions. I'm having so many problems today with this. Okay. The yearnings of the heart. You know what I'm saying? It's different from the mind, the reasoning capacity, right? You know what I'm saying? Okay. I'm saying only if you haven't been brought up in any faith and you don't even know what I have been talking about for the most part. Perhaps you're very young. I don't know. But in any case, philosophers have always said that there are these three characteristics of man. In the Enlightenment, starting with perhaps not starting with him, but in any case, Descartes, the philosopher, defined man as body and mind. And the soul was gradually taken out. Why? Everything can be explained rationally. How can you explain hope rationally? Well, I can explain hope rationally, no problem. So they start telling you how rationally and logically you might have this hope and so on and so forth. But there is something there that doesn't quite give the answer to. As some philosopher, I don't remember who, said that the heart has needs that the mind cannot answer or fulfill. You know what I'm saying now, right? Okay. So when you're left with, let's say, no soul, just your body and your reasoning capacity. You are alone spiritually, and when that happens, you're much more easily manipulated because you have no center. You have, as it were, in the soul, no spine. So you're more like a jellyfish, sort of, here, there, and everywhere. There is no spine there. There is no trunk of a tree. And so, orphan, as Plato said, because you are in the world like a 2-year-old in New York. And like a 2-year-old toddler in New York, what you want is safety. Even if the person who's going to give you his hand and take you home is not the best person and you sense that you're scared of him, nevertheless, the safety of a grown-up, the safety of someone who tells you, do this, you that, do that. And you feel safe because of that. When you have that other spiritual spine, it's much more easy to say no, or to say why, or to say that's wrong. When you don't have it, you're everywhere, doing the best you can, but you are an orphan. And so that security and that safety that you're looking for, those answers that you're searching for, they're going to provide them for you. Oh, they will. Don't worry. They're going to tell you what is good for you. And for your tribe, and for your family, and for your nation, and for your community. They're going to tell you. They don't give two hoots about you personally. You understand that. It's not you. It is because what they are going to tell you to do is to their interest, those above. Well, I'm not going to follow. Yes, you are going to follow. They'll very soon have you eating crickets. I'm not going to eat crickets. Yes, you will. Yes, you will. Not long ago, when they asked you to inject yourself with something there, you were clumping like seals. Yes, you will eat crickets, and much more. Why? What is in their interest? They see only the world, not the eternal, but the transitory and the temporary. And they see it in the way that Fray Juan, I read you. It's in their interest. They are making themselves gods, to put it in a spiritual way, but they are the lords and the masters. And in order to satisfy their cravings to be God, you are going to follow. And they're going to give you the rules and tell you what to do, and that is your safety, because you have no mother or father. I don't know for how long I've been... oh my goodness. All right. I'm going to end this way. You have to... I didn't particularly want to talk about, you understand, the problems with the Vatican. I think those are clear. I think those are for us to see what is happening. So the Catholic Church has been taken over. We haven't got to the worst yet. We must, like the Orthodox church did, I think we will have to, it will renew itself. I have no doubt about that, but it will have to come from the ashes again, and grow. The next pope will probably, my own personal opinion is that the next pope will be worse, because, as I said a couple of times before, he has packed the court. He has promoted all types of people there who are the majority, over 70 bishops, and so they're going to vote someone who is like him and follow his thing. Okay, so things are going to become worse, I think, within the structure of the Vatican itself. We are now, within the hierarchy, we have bishops who have started to speak out. Most of them don't. So I look at them as career politicians. They have nothing to say to me anymore. The people who in this day and age, when we are mutilating children, preach a sermon, that you have nothing to say to me. So when the time comes, perhaps it is the structure of the church that will have to go through some changes. I have no doubt at all that the Catholic Church, there will be a rebirth. But we have to go all the way down to being reborn again. I suppose the Church does. This has happened a number of times. This is not the only pope that, the Church had problems with. Let's say, at the very least, the confusion that he's causing. There have been, I think, 6 or 7 popes who were absolute horrors. The Borgias, a pope here at the top of their power, when you get to the very top, then the corruption, the degeneracy is shown. So we had popes who had children and this and that. But they never attempted to change doctrine. They were terrible people, but the doctrine, they never really attempted to change it. This is the first one. So we are going along a sort of a logical path, I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever. And I think actually the resurgence will probably come from America, where it is most culturally attacked. Yeah, that is where the FBI is going to mass to watch over them. All right, it is from there, from the cradle of this new what do I call it, ideology? From the cradle, everything is coming from America. I think that is where Christ will be help his church again. Yeah, he always goes for where the sinner is. So the least worthy or something, I don't know, but he always chooses not the best that you can admire, So since all these things are coming from America, I think I have every hope that America will become the new Rome. Not in the sense of transferring the actual, seat of the church to America. It has to be Rome, because that's where St. Peter and Paul are. St. Peter crucified like a slave, yes, with his head down, upside down, actually, which might actually had been better, because the death was people say faster that way. Because when you were crucified, you could be there on a cross for days, actually. And if they tied you, it lasted longer than if they nail you. It would be even longer. So, but anyway, that's Rome. So, but the beginning of the resurgence of the Catholic faith and and we can see it there already. It is actually America where we see traditional Catholic priests celebrating the Mass and the Eucharist in the same way that it has been done for 2,000 years. That is where we begin. As for the Agenda 2030, you're not going anywhere, my friends, because you are very quickly destroying yourselves. You don't scare me. Goodbye. I have been talking for a long time. Bye-bye.